Let's begin with a question. Do universal propositions entail their corresponding particular propositions? For instance, does an A proposition entail its corresponding I proposition? For instance, a universal one would be all S are P, and a particular is some S are P. Well, does all S are P imply or entail some S are P? Well, intuitively, this seems to be the case. After all, if all cats are mammals, then it must be true that some cats are mammals. Or, perhaps more clearly, that all cats are mammals entails at least one cat is mammal. But what does categorical logic say about this? Understanding the answer requires understanding the notion of existential commitment. Remember that S is used to abbreviate the subject term. And so if we have particular sentences, that is, those that begin with some S, right, and then end with is P, well, if a sentence of the form some S is P is true, then there must be some S. So if you say that some cats are noisy is true, then it must be the case that there is at least one cat, right? Accordingly, 1 entails 2, and 3 entails 4. That is, if 1 is true, then 2 must be true. And likewise, if 3 is true, then 4 must be true. This means that for a particular sentence to be true, its subject class must have at least one member. So the truth of some dogs are fast requires the existence of at least one dog. This means that particular forms carry what is called existential commitment or existential import. A proposition or type of proposition is said to have existential commitment if the truth of the proposition requires the existence of members of the subject class. So particular propositions carry existential commitment. But what about universal ones? There are two views on this issue: the traditional view and the modern view. According to the traditional view, universal propositions do have existential commitment, and in this respect, they are like particular propositions. But according to the modern view, universal propositions don't have existential commitment, and so in this respect, they are different from particular ones. In this class, we'll adopt the modern view, even though it seems a bit counterintuitive at first. Now, what are the reasons for rejecting the view that universal propositions have existential commitment? Here's a problem with the traditional view. Take these two sentences. All inhabitants of Mars are blonde, and some inhabitants of Mars are not blonde. Well, these are contradictories, right? That means that one is true and the other one is false. And it can be that both are true, and it can be that both are false. Now, suppose that we assume the traditional view and say that universal sentences have existential commitment. In both sentences, the subject term is inhabitants of Mars. And that, as far as we know, that's an empty subject term. That means that in both these sentences, the subject term is empty. Now, if universal sentences had existential commitment, that means that both of the sentences would be false. However, if both can be false, that means that they are not contradictories, because contradictories have to be, well, one of them true and the other one false. So it looks like these two sentences are both contradictories and not contradictories at the same time. Well, that's not a result that you want. And so we see that although the traditional interpretation preserves subalternation, that is, that the universal proposition entails the particular proposition, that, for instance, A sentences imply I sentences and E sentences imply O sentences, it does not respect contradictoriness, and that is highly problematic. One possible remedy is presupposition. Suppose that we say that all propositions presuppose that the classes to which they refer have members. This means that if their subject classes are empty, then they are neither true nor false. They simply can't be evaluated. Well, this seems to take care of the problem with sentences such as all unicorns are pretty or no unicorns are pretty. Nevertheless, this apparent solution comes at a cost, and it's a high one. Take a proposition such as no unicorns exist. Now, this proposition is true because there are no unicorns. Let's see what happens. If it is true, then there are no unicorns. That means that the subject class is empty. And so, within the presupposition approach, this sentence would be neither true nor false. But that seems like a bad consequence because that sentence is definitely true. Or suppose that you have a sign that says all trespassers will be prosecuted. And also suppose that you really intend to honor that threat and that you have the means to do it. And suppose also that there are no trespassers. And suppose that there will never be. Well, that means that this sentence will be neither true nor false. But we wanted to say that it is true. Also, scientific laws sometimes contain idealizations. For instance, suppose that you say that all bodies that are not acted by any external forces remain in rest, or they continue their straight line motion. Now, we want to say that that is true, right, in Newtonian physics. However, we know that there are no bodies that are not acted by any external forces, however small they are. That means that this proposition would be neither true nor false. So sometimes we say true things about things that don't exist. However, if the presupposition approach were adopted, then this wouldn't be possible. And there are many other fallacies that you could commit if you were to assign existential commitment to universal statements. So why should we accept the modern view? But remember that we already studied conditionals in propositional logic. Also remember that P and Q can stand for any proposition whatsoever. So suppose that P stands for something is S and Q stands for it is P or then it is P. If with this substitution, then the A proposition, that is all S or P, would be represented as if P then Q. That is, whenever you find something that is S, you're going to find that is P automatically. If something is a cat, then it is a mammal. And something similar goes for E propositions of the form no S or P. So if I say that no cats are reptiles, what I'm saying is that if I find a cat, then I'm also going to find that it is not a reptile. That is, that it's a non-reptile, right? And so an E proposition would be represented as if P, then not Q. Now remember the truth table for the condition. In this truth table, the only condition in which if P then Q was false is when the antecedent is true and the conditional is false. In every other case, it is true. And in particular, so look at the two bottom rows. So whenever the antecedent is false, the whole conditional is true. Then again, suppose that P is something is S and the consequent is something is Q. Well, if there are no S, right, that means that the antecedent is always going to be false, right? But if the antecedent is false, then the whole sentence is true. So, since there are no unicorns, conditionals of the form if X is a unicorn, then it is whatever, are always going to be true because of the truth table of the condition. This is what happens when the antecedent is something is S, as in the case of universal. So whenever the subject category is empty, right, then the whole sentence, the whole universal sentence is going to be true. Again, since there are no unicorns, every instance of if X is a unicorn, then X is nice is going to be true, because X is a unicorn can never be true, right? That means that the universal is going to be true. All unicorns are nice is true if and only if when all of the conditionals of the form if X is a unicorn, X is nice is true. So in this case, all unicorns are nice is going to be true. But the same happens with no unicorns are nice. Every conditional of the form if X is a unicorn, then X isn't nice is going to be true, because the antecedent is going to be false. And whenever the antecedent is false, the whole conditional is true. So every instance of if X is true, then X is not nice is always going to be true. So the universal every unicorn isn't nice, or what is the same, no unicorn is nice, is also true. So since there are no unicorns, and given the fact that universal sentences are interpreted as conditionals, and given that conditionals are true whenever the antecedent is false, well, both the sentence all unicorns are nice and the sentence no unicorns are nice are true. Thus, the truth of a universal sentence, A or E, does not guarantee the existence of members of the class denoted by the subject term. We've seen that both no unicorns are nice and all unicorns are nice are true, despite the fact that there are no uniforms, and indeed because of it. This is why universal forms do not have existential commitment under the modern view. So let's finish our table of contradictories. Should we say that A and E are contradictories? Clearly not, since both the A and E versions of a categorical proposition can be true at the same time, as shown by the unicorn example. Another consequence of the lack of existential commitment of universal sentences is that universal sentences are no longer going to imply their correspondent particular sentences. For instance, if you have, say, all unicorns are nice, and then some unicorns are nice, well, it is possible for the first to be true and the second to be false, right? Because given that there are no unicorns, all unicorns are nice is going to be true. However, since particular sentences do preserve existential commitment, then some unicorns are nice is going to be false. So in the modern interpretation in general, prepositions of form A are not going to entail prepositions of form I, and prepositions of form E are not going to entail prepositions of form O. Okay, this is all I have to say for now about existential commitment.